Hello, AP Environmental Science students. Welcome to Topic 2, 1.2, Terrestrial Biomes of Unit 1, The Living World. We're going to continue our work talking about ecosystems, but talking about them from a different scale. To begin with, I want to show you Google Earth, take you on a little magical school bus ride to La Follette High School. And here we have our arboretum, which basically consists of two major ecosystems, a forest ecosystem you can kind of see here, and a prairie ecosystem, and another smaller forest which represents north woods. So we know ecosystems have all these species interactions and can really use ecosystems as a lens to look at those interactions. We can also look at flows of energy, cycles of matter, but to really understand some of the environmental problems that we're going to be talking about in the future, such as global warming, talking about how carbon is stored on a global level, we need to really back it up. So I'm going to back us up to where we can see some divisions of biomes. So here we are, Madison, Wisconsin, the Great Lakes region. And now you can start to tease apart, based on this Google Earth imagery, the major types of vegetation that exist in the United States. And we're going to make some distinctions between those. I'm going to give you some tips on what are the things to really remember about those different biomes, why they're important, and hopefully review some of the concepts that we talked about with ecology. So here you can see from Google Earth, and the most of the text and the curriculum deals with North American biomes. These biomes, which there are 9, also exist in other continents as well. But you can see the major eastern forest biome, in which deciduous forest, in which we are part of here in Wisconsin. We are, though, however, on the edge of the prairie. So there is a grassland biome which extends all the way to the Rocky Mountains, and we're going to be talking about that. Also, of course, the mountains themselves, the deserts, our temperate rainforests out in the Pacific Northwest. We're going to be getting a better perspective also on some things like what's going on in Greenland. Whoa, I don't know why that happened, but it's spinning. And the Greenland ice sheet and the permafrost that exists in some of that region. So let us get started. All right, so let's get going. So the living world ecosystems, topic 1.2, terrestrial biomes. Today our instructional purpose is through a recorded lecture that I'm going to give you here. You should be able to identify and describe some of the environmental issues related to the major world biomes. You should be able to identify some of the biomes based on a climatogram, which I'm going to show you, some of the represented organisms, and you should be aware of some of the challenges facing each of those. So the basics, what is a biome? This is a large area of the Earth, like I showed you in Google Earth, characterized by distinct climate conditions. You can usually make them out based on satellite imagery, based on vegetation. Down at the ground level, there are representative organisms, key species, most often plants. We also talk about some of the mammals that live there, but don't forget there's lots of other players, insects and so forth, that are interacting in that ecosystem. They usually have similar adaptations, those organisms. An example might be the saguaro cactus, which you could find down in Arizona, down in the Sonoran deserts, places where there's not a lot of rainfall and they have to retain lots of water. So a climatogram, here's an image, kind of a general image. I want to see by the end of this lecture if you can identify which biome this represents. It shows us two y-axes, one showing rainfall, and those are represented by the bars on the bottom. And then we've got, which is in millimeters, and then we have temperature, average temperatures over those months. So it's usually month by month, the climatogram, and it gives us a whole year picture of what's going on in that area. Um, so I'm going to walk through some of the major 9 biomes that we have here on our planet. I'm going to make distinctions between what are tropical regions. You can see these dashed lines here. Those represents our latitude. You remember latitude lines go this way, longitudinal lines go this way. Um, that's our tropical region, about 23 degrees, 23.5 degrees latitude. So everything inside there is considered tropical. Temperate extends up from there, both north and south, to about 66 degrees latitude. Hope you guys hear that goldfinch. Goldfinch is really going off right now. So latitude is going to tell us kind of a picture of what's going on in terms of the biomes, but also you can see there's lots of variation within those different biomes in latitude based on rainfall patterns, especially around coastal regions, and we're going to talk about how that works, and mountains and how that shapes those major biomes. Okay, so tundra. So when we think of tundra, of course, we think cold, and temperatures you can see stay below freezing, and this is 0 degrees Celsius almost the whole year. Popping up over, you see in this example, in I think that, let's see, what month is that? That's in the summer, July and August. It might reach just above freezing for a short period of time. You can see rainfall patterns are pretty low. And because of that, they're fairly fragile ecosystems. Their soils are very thin. So important facts I'm looking at right now. Very thin soils, and they have a very low what's called primary production, meaning there's not a lot of vegetation growing there. In fact, if you look at major plant types, there's no trees whatsoever. You'll have shrubs, lichens, which I'm going to show you some examples of, which grow here as well, but they pretty much cover the ground there. There's actually a reindeer lichen, which obviously is very important to things like caribou. So example animals you see there are hare, Arctic fox, polar bear, and caribou. Another important fact you see about tundra, and something to remember, is this permafrost. So as we said, the temperature barely gets up above freezing, and because of that, the ground remains frozen. And frozen in there is all the organic matter that's built up over time as the lichens and the shrubs die, and it traps those carbon molecules. As our planet warms through climate change, a big concern is that a positive feedback loop will occur where that permafrost will melt and will release through probably anaerobic bacteria those carbon molecules in the form of methane, CH4. That methane gas, of course, will go up in the atmosphere, become a greenhouse. It is a greenhouse gas. It's actually a very powerful greenhouse gas, and will feed to climate change. And with more climate change, more melting of permafrost, and this positive feedback loop continues. So don't forget those two important facts. Boreal forest, I had an opportunity to go up to the Boundary Waters this summer. Pretty amazing place. Temperatures you can see getting pretty balmy, up to 10 degrees Celsius. So warmer months, you can get warmer temperatures. Precipitation, those blue bars, you can see going up a lot higher. So pretty good rainfall patterns. What do you see there? Well, right behind me, I have some pine trees. They're probably white. They are white pine, and they'd probably be more common up north, but somebody planted them here in my backyard. So conifers such as spruce and pine trees, things like wolves, moose, bear, beaver. The one thing about the vegetation is pretty interesting. It's kind of a mosaic pattern. So you'll get usually patches of pines and patches of spruces and some poplars, and it kind of forms this kind of mosaic pattern. Latitude between 50 degrees north and 60 degrees north in North America and Russia. So boreal forest tends to be a northern hemisphere. It is a northern hemisphere biome. Short growing season, low precipitation, comparing to tundra higher. Decomposition rates are fairly low. And all right, so I want to talk about temperate rainforests. Maybe you've traveled out to the west coast of the United States and had an opportunity to see the redwoods, or someplace near Seattle or Portland, and you probably brought a rain jacket. Rainfall can be pretty extreme in some places, like the Olympia National Forest in Puget Sound area, upwards to 138 inches of rainfall. So that's a good 3-4 times more rain than we get here. What do you see when you go there? You see lots of conifers, pine, much like our boreal forest. We get those pine trees, we get conifers, but they grow immensely. And you have specialized species like I mentioned, the redwoods. Um, High precipitation, moderate temperatures. Trees can grow fairly rapidly in those conditions, but typically the nutrients are fairly low in those forests. Things you can find there, organisms, banana slug, which is, if you Google that, pretty interesting looking organism. There's actually Santa Cruz, University of California, Santa Cruz, that's their mascot. Spotted owls, which are an endangered species. I worked for the National Forest Service in Northern California. I used to hoot for them. Maybe I can do that sometime. Let you know what they sound like, and surveyed those species in and around areas that were going to be logged. This area has had lots of impact of logging because of those tree resources. Temperate seasonal forest, deciduous forest. And deciduous, you remember, means trees that lose their leaves like they are right now pretty soon here in Wisconsin. Rainfall, you can see, is less. Temperatures tend to fluctuate quite a bit, as we know, 4 seasons. And you can see that in this climatogram. Trees, the dominant vegetation depends on what type of forest you have. I'm going to show you an example of an oak forest, an oak hickory forest here today. There are different climax, which is the kind of last stage typically of forest vegetation you can find in hardwoods. If you get outside in your yard, you're going to see things like chipmunks and squirrels running about. Things are getting pretty nutty this time of year. Lots of hickories and oaks dropping food sources, and lots of competition going on between those organisms. White-tailed deer are also a common species. So remember, this extends from the east coast of the United States all the way to us here in Wisconsin. Typically a high net primary production. Many of these areas have been logged. Many of these areas have been farmed because soil nutrients tend to be reasonably high. Some of these areas have been coming back in the state of Wisconsin. Much of our forests were cut 100 years ago or more, and now some of those are coming back. But some of those permanent agricultural lands will remain agriculture. So temperate seasonal forest. All right, here's one that's a fairly small, localized biome, the woodland shrubland chaparral. You can find this in Southern California if you've ever gone down near San Francisco, Mediterranean areas. And what you tend to have are fairly distinct rainfall patterns. You can see they're kind of a distinct rain pattern that happens early on in the year, and then later on at the end of the year, and kind of a dry spell in between. So fairly distinct rainfall, but not tons of rain. So 25 to 125 centimeters, or 20 to 49 inches. So you can get some drought-resistant plants, sages, yucca plants. You'll get things like the mule deer, which is a little distinct from our deer, roadrunners, coyotes. Net primary production is fairly limited by high temperatures and low precipitation. Typically, these are areas that are subjected to lots of fire. As we know, California seems to be having fires throughout this season right now recently. And a lot of that has to do with this adaptation. Many of those areas are under a normal fire regime, which means fires come and go and alter the ecosystem, especially those shrub areas. Temperate grassland, thing to note. So we are, again, in kind of the edge of where's the temperate forest and the temperate grasslands. There are distinct grasslands. The ones we have around here are tall grass prairies. And those are kind of distinct from the ones when you get out near Kansas and Oklahoma, you get into short grass prairies. So plant types, you're going to have grasses, you're going to have flowering plants. Bison historically roamed across the United States. Prairie dogs, black-footed ferret, which is an endangered species. You can see the climatogram. We can see that we've got temperature ranges fluctuating from 23 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and rainfall can be extremely low. There are areas of grasslands which are borderline deserts. Really depends on where you're located, how much primary production you get. Typically, the closer you are to the Midwest, right, where we are in Wisconsin, the higher the rainfall. The further you move across to the west, you're going to get drier conditions. This is obviously a place where we've done a lot of agriculture, and we have eliminated lots of our prairies or grasslands, probably our most endangered ecosystem in North America. Fires are also very important, and fires help eliminate those tree species from dominating that ecosystem. In fact, if you're around in the spring, we'll be burning our prairie in the Arboretum if you'd like to come and help us. Okay, tropical rainforests. What do we see when we see tropical rainforests? We know that we get lots of rainfall. We have high temperatures. We have lots of biodiversity. Lots of species that we kind of think of, poison dart frogs. If we're in Africa, we can see gorillas. In Asia, we can see orangutans, jaguars in South America. This is an area that has very high biomass, and in fact, it's the highest in terms of net primary production. One thing that's important to note, though, is the soil. The soil typically does not contain a lot of nutrients in tropical rainforest. The nutrients are all in the upper parts in the forest itself. Consequently, when deforestation does happen, there's a rapid loss of nutrients, and soil productivity can go very low, making it very difficult for the vegetation to come back. And it takes a long time for a forest, once it's been disturbed, to return to its original state. I lived in South America for 3 years in Paraguay and did some agroforestry in tropical rainforest, which were systems to try to improve agricultural production as well as maintain some of the biodiversity of that area. So tropical seasonal dry forests. So these are called savannas. Savannas are located obviously in Africa. We can think of places you can drive around and see lions and zebras and elephants. We do have some savanna type forests located here in Wisconsin, oak savannas, which can be regional, tend to be in areas which are sort of a transition between, again, those forest ecosystems or biomes and the grasslands. And you have a tree located here and there surrounded by grass. Rainfall patterns, you can see, can fluctuate. Temperatures also tend to be on the higher level. They have distinct wet and dry seasons like we saw before. And decomposition rate is usually fairly fast. And that means the soils tend to be fairly fertile. and they retain those nutrients. And again, precipitation is a big factor in determining how much biomass can grow there. Grazing and fire are management techniques to try to reduce woody plants and trees from kind of taking over that ecosystem. We're going to be talking about grazing and managing of cows later. Think back to Tragedy of the Commons and how best those can be managed. Deserts. So deserts, we know, are dry. They don't have much rainfall. Typically, they are hot. Temperatures can go from 68 to 88. In the case of Death Valley in California, most recently, 135 degrees was reached this year. And there's projections that that number will become a norm as we move into climate change, and possibly creating areas that are what we call super deserts. When you know you're in a desert, you see cactuses, you see succulents, species which are adapted to low water conditions like camels, scorpions. Examples would be the Sahara, the Gobi, the Mojave Desert. Primary production is limited again by rainfall. Low net primary production because rainfall is pretty uncommon, and a high sensitivity to disturbance. When deserts are disturbed, it's very difficult for those ecosystems to come back. All right, that's our 9. So here they are all together, kind of looking at annual precipitation and average temperature. So this visual can kind of give you an idea of the relationships between those abiotic factors and those different biomes. So big recap, biomes are large regions that share similar characteristics. They have the same biome can be found in multiple locations throughout the world. Biomes tend to have species with similar adaptations, and these species have evolved adaptations to live under these climate conditions. All right, so I'm going to show you some examples to kind of give you, reinforce these concepts. As I mentioned before, in the tundra, one of the dominant organisms you can find is lichens. We can find lichens here in our temperate forest. Here on the rock, you see all this green, light green substance. It's probably a, I forget the names of the different lichens, but I think it's a foliate lichen. If I zoom in really close, you can kind of see its structure. And it's a symbiotic or mutualistic relationship. So lichen is actually 2 species. It is a fungus and an algae which lives symbiotically and does photosynthesis. Lichen can also grow on trees. So here's a branch, and we can see a couple different species of lichen in different colors. So late summer, early fall is a great time to get out in the deciduous woods here in Wisconsin, our biome. Behind me is one of my favorite trees, the shagbark hickory. You can see that bark pattern, bark kind of peeling off. Also, lots of nuts hitting the ground right now. And if you listen around us, we can hear some chipmunks, some blue jays, squirrel activity, lots of animals trying to gather resources to make it through the cold winters that we have here in Wisconsin. A group of species very common in deciduous woods are woodpeckers, of course. And here we have a feather that I found on a trail. I think this is a downy woodpecker. We probably have probably 6 species in this woods of different types of woodpeckers. And they are eating larvae from the trees, usually decaying trees. To create the rich soils in a temperate forest requires the help of lots of microbes and funguses, decomposers like this turkey tail. You see this white fungus that's growing on the edge of this log, and funguses that might start breaking down matter even before the leaves fall. So typically when you find a leaf,
You look closely, you're going to see little black spots. Typically those are funguses, and those funguses help break down that organic matter.
Here's a chipmunk, which is very common in deciduous woods, trying to get stores of food for the winter.
In your wanderings of looking for organisms, don't forget to look down and see if you find anything like this. This is scat. Yes, begins with an S, ends with a T, comes out of you, comes out of me. I know what you're thinking. Some call it that, but be scientific and call it scat. Probably from a fox. Fox are a common organism in and around these woods. They have dens, and here it is. Where I am here in Indian Mound Forest, which is located in McFarland, there are attempts to make a oak savanna, so an oak hickory forest actually. And this is a hickory tree, there are oak trees, and then throughout this area, this is a moraine, which is created by glaciers. It's a deposit, a large deposit, a kind of high area in town. Our water tower is located up on top, and Native Americans have built mounds throughout this region. As mentioned earlier, the prairie ecosystems here in Wisconsin and probably throughout the world, grasslands, are one of the most endangered ecosystems. So what can be done about it? Here I am in my front yard, and what I've been trying to do slowly is replace some of my lawn with native planting, and those are species typically tall grass. Prairie species like this here, prairie dropseed, and flowering species which provide a valuable habitat for pollinators. One of the ways you can reduce runoff pretty easy in an area being developed is creating what's called a rain garden slash retention basin. So what you see here behind me is a series of native plants which are adapted to wet soils, and up above here is McFarland Middle School, and they just did a big construction, and that construction created lots of runoff, and the building continues to create runoff. It's being diverted down into this swale, this low area, and that sediment is being trapped. Hopefully the nutrients are being filtered by the plants, and the water that goes on down to the lakes hopefully is that much cleaner.